Have you ever wanted to literally solve the ultimate question of life, but, felt like words just weren't cutting it? We all chase meaning, but it usually feels so incredibly abstract. Well, welcome to today's Explainer. We're jumping right in to decode a truly fascinating philosophical framework from a Substack called Simplifying Ideas Differently. We're going to use the universal language of math to actually try and understand the human pursuit of meaning. It's a completely different way to look at reality, and I am absolutely thrilled to guide you through it. So, what are the actual solutions to existence? I mean, that is the central mystery of the human condition, right? But here's the thing. Throughout this explainer, we aren't just going to guess or rely on vague poetry. No, we're going to establish a premise, test our variables, and go on a rigorous mathematical quest to actually find the answer. Okay, let's dive into this. Think of our agenda today as a step-by-step logical proof. We're going to cover 1. The equation of existence. 2. The trivial zero, which is death. 3. Religion's spurious root. 4. Spirituality's asymptotic approach. And finally, 5. Finding the true root. Let's kick things off with section 1. The equation of existence, establishing the variables. All right, so here is the core definition we'll be working with. Let E equal E of X be the equation of existence. But notice that absolutely crucial detail there. X lives in the complex plane. What does that mean? Well, it means it doesn't just live in the standard everyday real numbers we use to, say, count our groceries. No, it's multidimensional. It combines both real and imaginary numbers to map out way more complicated spaces. And honestly, solving for this variable X is the ultimate goal of the entire framework we're exploring today. So definitely keep this equation in mind as we test our inputs. Moving right along to section 2, the trivial zero, death. This is attempt number 1. So if we take the absolute state of death and plug it in as our variable, we see that E of death does in fact equal 0. Mathematically speaking, it kind of looks like a clean solution, right? However, the author points out a pretty major flaw here. This result relies on X being strictly real valued, and analytically, that turns out to be a complete dead end. Because, think about it, if you solve the pain of existence simply by ending the observer, you haven't really solved anything at all. You've just, well, quit the game. So, the crucial point is that death is what mathematicians actually call a trivial zero. It's a state that just terminates the equation rather than genuinely solving it. It completely collapses the domain, meaning it destroys the very playing field where the question of existence was being asked in the first place. You technically get a solution, sure, but literally only by destroying the context. The source text actually illustrates this so vividly. It says it's like dividing by 0 to simplify a problem. If you've ever taken an algebra class, you know for sure that dividing by 0 doesn't give you some clever shortcut. No, it absolutely breaks the math entirely. And death does the exact same thing to our equation of existence. It removes the observer, and by doing that, completely removes the meaning. Which brings us to attempt number 2. Section 3, religion's spurious root. Now, when we test religion as our next variable, the equation actually forms an oscillatory sine wave. You can see the parameters there representing amplitude, frequency, and phase. But, what does that actually mean for us? Well, what the author is saying mathematically is that religion creates local zeros. These are moments of comfort, resolution, and meaning that cycle up and down over time. They might vary across different traditions, sure, but they essentially maintain the exact same universal waving form. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how the author defines this state. They call it a spurious root. It's bounded, it's periodic, and it continuously cycles. Basically, religion hands you a static coordinate system, like a frozen set of axioms or scriptures. And hey, this provides incredible stability. But while it's super stable, it never actually converges to the true ultimate root of the equation. In fact, when you use this spurious root, you're, and I love this quote from the text, navigating a living equation with a dead map. The author's view here is that stability is simply not the same thing as truth. Taking a snapshot of a rotation is not a universal constant. Now, don't get me wrong, those moments of peace, those local zeros we talked about, they're very real and deeply comforting. But mathematically speaking, they are not the definitive answer to the equation. So let's look at attempt number 3, section 4, spirituality's asymptotic approach. Let's compare these two frameworks side by side. As we saw, the source describes religion as relying on a fixed basis, a static coordinate system, or a dead map. Spirituality, however, utilizes a dynamic basis. The crucial structural difference here is that spirituality continuously redefines the space as the observer moves through it. The map actively updates with the territory. It's literally a living map. So how exactly does that dynamic map translate to our math? Well, we see that E of spirituality approaches 0 as X approaches X star, which is our true root. This formula reveals an approach that is constantly curving downward. It doesn't ever land exactly on the absolute solution. Instead, it continuously and infinitely moves toward it. And this brilliantly illustrates what the author calls an asymptotic approach. It's essentially a winding spiral trajectory. Because the true root lives in the complex plane, no simple, real-valued path can ever arrive there exactly. By taking this spiraling approach, the author argues it's mathematically the most honest trajectory available to us. It represents a life of continuous growth, getting closer and closer to the truth without prematurely collapsing the beautiful mystery of the universe down to just basic real numbers. This brings us to our final destination, Section 5, Finding the True Root, the Final Proof. All right, here is the real mind-bending realization of this entire framework. The true root, X star, equals A plus BI. The true solution to the equation of existence exists uniquely in the complex plane. It requires both a standard real number, A, and an imaginary number, BI, working perfectly together. Let's move to our next slide and see how this cleanly builds together. Part A is the real axis. This represents the physical, experiential dissolution of the constructed self. But you absolutely also need Part B, the imaginary axis. This represents the mental reference frames you actually need for realization. So the ultimate takeaway of this whole mathematical proof, to truly solve existence, the observer must hold both the physical reality and the mental imaginary frameworks at the exact same time. Which brings us to a perfectly provocative question directly from the source text itself. What is the truth beyond words? I mean, math can build the map, right? It can point us to the complex plane. It can show us exactly how to balance the physical and the imaginary. But the actual experience of that truth at that specific coordinate, well, that is a profound mystery left entirely for your own independent exploration. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep questioning, keep analyzing, and I'll catch you next time.